The next speaker is a man who is a cultural theorist with 45 years of experience in community art, author of the book A Restless Art. Please welcome for the presentation a principle of resistance, François Matarasso.
Morning. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to come and speak today. I'm going to speak much more personally than you have just heard. So going really from the European level to the very individual level. I hesitated to accept the invitation because when I have spoken in the past, my intention has always been to be encouraging. And in recent years, it has seemed to be increasingly difficult to be encouraging. We live in a world facing huge problems, divided and at war. And in the context of that, the work that I have spent my life doing has seemed often inadequate, shall we say. So I've called this talk Heroic Optimism because I think that's what we need. Optimism is a form of heroism at the moment. The images the image that you see is from a big European project I worked on most recently that finished at the end of 2022, a community opera project. It represents some of what I will talk about. And particularly, I'm going to talk about how co-creation is a site of resistance. And let me talk a little bit about what I mean by resistance. The image that you can see there, I confess it's not a book that I've read, but I came across it in reading and thinking about resistance. And this is specifically about ecological resistance. And it was a nice metaphor of how nature actually recovers and resists some of the things that are put to it. Why speak of resistance? I don't want to use the word resistance in a grand way. I think it's quite a humble capacity, but a powerful one. It can be a way to protect ourselves and the work that we do. Resistance can be passive. It doesn't have to be a grand thing. It's like ecology. It is coping with what the world throws at us. And it is often very creative in itself. We have to find new ways of coping, of resisting the context in which we live. And of course, it can be powerful. And I'll come on to what that means later in the talk. Above all, resistance can be within reach. I don't think of myself as a brave person. I think that there are great things that people can do, but there are also smaller things, stubborn things. You can just dig your heels in and say, I won't put up with this. I will carry on doing my own thing. So I'm going to talk about the context of how co-creation can be a form of resistance in the world that we live in. Co-creation, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. Co-creation tends to be on the margins, and we've just heard a lot about rural areas being marginal. Co-creation thrives in the margins, where often it is ignored. It tends to be self-generating. It doesn't depend on other people, other institutions, other forces, other funds to make things happen. It tends to be inventive, to come up with new solutions, new ways of doing things. And two things that are very important to me, which I'll come on to at the end of the talk, it tends to build capabilities, our ability to be and do what we want to be in the world. And consequently, it can be empowering. So what do I mean by co-creation? Simply the creation of art by professional and non-professional artists. That formulation is important to me because I think that anyone who makes art is an artist. I think that it is unhelpful to talk about artists working with communities. Anybody who is involved in making art is an artist. There is a meaningful distinction between the professionals and the non-professionals, however. And that's what you can see in this image from another of the operas that I worked on. You can see a professional opera singer and a community, members of the local community, working together, creating something that neither of them could create without the others. Professional artists, and here again you can see an image where you can see the woman is a professional opera singer, the man is a non-professional artist. As it happens, he's also an inmate in a Portuguese prison. Professional artists bring education, they bring skills and expertise, they bring knowledge of their work, they bring experience, they bring a context of knowing what are the standards in their field, what are the current preoccupations in their field. So they bring informed judgment, and of course you hope that they bring talent. What do non-professional artists bring? First of all, an open mind. They don't start by thinking they know how things should be done. They start by asking questions very often that the professional artists no longer ask. So they bring new ideas. They say, why don't we do things like this? And the professional artist says, you know what? I haven't thought of that because I'm so used to doing it in the way that I've been taught to do it. They bring knowledge of their situation. In this case, it may be knowledge of life in rural areas. What it is like to be a 14-year-old living in a depopulated rural village is a very different kind of knowledge to what it is like to be a professional musician or writer or actor. So they have experience, powerful experience of their own lives, and that gives them something to say. They come into these projects because they have something to say, because the project is an opportunity in which to say it. And very often, it may be the only opportunity that they have. So they have a need to say it. They want to seize that moment. And of course, they also may bring talent to that experience. Out of that, they have the combination of professional and non-professional artists brings intrinsic diversity. And I like this quote from Audre Lorde, the American writer and feminist, who says, difference must be seen as a fund of necessary polarities between which our creativity can spark. And I focus on the word necessary. We need these differences, this diversity, in order to promote our creativity. This is a model I've I've been thinking about for a number of years. The key issue in co-creation work is who has control. Yes, we have professional artists and we have non-professional artists working together, but where control lies matters. Where is the power in this dynamic? The more the power lies in professional hands, the more you're involved in social inclusion projects, access projects, art for all. The more power lies in the hands of the non-professionals, you are in the field of genuine co-creation and art by, with, and for all. What I would call cultural democracy, as opposed to cultural democratization. I'm going to talk briefly about some principles of co-creation. Half a dozen simple ideas which I came out of the opera co-creation project which I worked on. Principles are useful, I think, because they are ideas against which to test practice. They are not fixed rules. All of the contexts and situations in which you work are different, unique. There may be good reasons why some of these principles are not applicable, but what matters is that you have thought them through and you can say why they might not be applicable. I would also say that I formulated these principles about 3 years ago, and I'm not sure they're right anymore. I'm still trying to think some of these things through. But I think they're useful in themselves, useful things to think about. The first is about being aware, understanding that your knowledge, your informed knowledge of the people, the context and the situations in which you work is the foundation of co-creation. It is different to be working in a prison, as in the image that you can see here, as to be working in a diverse community or in a rural area or in a peri-urban area. All of these situations, all of these contexts are different, and your awareness of them is fundamental to good work. Secondly, the basis of equality between everybody who's involved is fundamental. All of my work starts from Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that everyone has the right to participate in the cultural life of the community and to enjoy the arts. It doesn't say that anybody has more right or less right than anyone else. It is a fundamentally equal basis. Now, of course, in practice, some people have a louder voice, some people have better ideas. That's the negotiation process of co-creation. But the starting point is equality. Another principle is that there should be ambition. There is no reason to be doing anything less well in a co-creation project or in a rural area than anywhere else. To give people less than your best, to expect less of them than their best, is to cheat them, to give them a second-rate experience and to condescend to them. And that implies honesty. Integrity is the foundation of trust. Unless people trust in what you say to them, because they know that you're speaking the truth to them, you will not be able to build relationships and sharing and learning and empowerment. That also implies that you have to be responsive. You have to listen. You have to be aware. You have to sense what other people are telling you and also what they're not telling you. And then you have to be able to flex your own work, your own response, your project in order to meet that the needs and the interests of the people that you're working with. You have to be adaptable. And this is important because it's often the case that projects with funding struggle to be adaptable. Actually, in practice, what they do is try to adapt the situation to their funding and not the other way around. That happens because funders are not always patient. But doing the work that you do, especially with rural communities, with communities where, as we've just heard, very large numbers of people do not believe that democracy is working for them, then you have to be patient because you have to build relationships. And it takes the time that it takes. You cannot hurry people into trusting you. And all of that means that you have to be hopeful, working in uncertainty, which brings me back to the notion of heroic optimism. You have to believe that this is worth doing, that you can do it, and that it will work. This is another definition of co-creation that I included in my book, A Restless Art. It's more demanding, and to some extent it sums up a lot of what I've just been saying. You can see that it contains the idea that co-creation is the creation of art by professional and non-professional artists, but includes some other ideas. So the creation of art as a human right, as I've said, it's already enshrined in Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which all European Union member states are signatories. Cooperating as equals, and I've spoken about the principle of equality being the foundation of the work that we do. For purposes and to standards they set together. This is very important because often in practice that doesn't happen. What happens is the artist will go and secure some funding, and then they will go and find a community to work with. The community often does not know what the purposes of the funding is, and they certainly have not been involved in setting the standards for that work, which means that the evaluation that is now a prerequisite of this work happens to standards that may be set hundreds or thousands of kilometers away by people who know nothing of their situation or their lives. It is fundamentally disempowering to have your work evaluated to standards that you have not been involved in agreeing and defining. And the consequence of that, if you have done all of the first part of that definition, then the processes, the products, and the outcomes of your work cannot be known in advance, because they will only be known through the process of working together in co-creation. And that means that you cannot promise them to a funder in advance. You can only promise the potential, an intention of doing something, a hope of doing something, not a guarantee. Why do any of this? Why does co-creation matter? Very often, the relationship between artists and funders that has developed in the last 30 years has been to deliver some kind of social change. Now, I don't believe that any of us can deliver change in other people. I struggle to change myself. How would I possibly change anyone else? What we can do is to create the conditions in which change is possible. And that's a very different thing. So why co-creation? To build capabilities. And here I use the concept of capabilities developed by thinkers like the economist Amartya Sen and the American philosopher Martha Nussbaum, who writes that capabilities are the answers to the question, what is this person able to do and to be? I've been very lucky in my life. I've been very privileged. I grew up in a context where I had many choices about what I could do or be. I had many freedoms. I was given education. I was given opportunities. And all of that means that I was able to choose what I would do and be with my working life. And some of the images that you've seen in this presentation are the results of the choices that I have made. But many people, most people I would argue, in the world today, have limited or sometimes no choice at all about what they can do and be. And their recognition that they don't have choices, that they see other people exercising, that they see spoken about in our media and on the internet, their consciousness that they do not have those choices, that those promises are denied to them in practice, is, I believe, a considerable factor in the frustration, in the lack of faith in democracy, in the turning towards anger and populist political solutions that seem to promise what isn't currently available. So the answer to how we make more people able to choose what to do and to be is critical. But it is important to think more broadly, because we live in a world which is currently very focused on the individual. But the individual, all of us, are part of a network, of a social network of interdependence. And our capabilities are not just the abilities that reside in each of us. They are a combination of those personal abilities and the political, social, and economic environment. The example I often give of that is that those of you in this room who are women, 100 years ago, you probably would not have been able to go to university. Or if you were able to go to university, you would not have been able to have a degree. It didn't mean that you had any less intelligence, any less capability, any less ability to benefit from education. It simply meant that male society reserved universities for male members of that society. That's what I mean by political, social, and economic environment. And that is very relevant to you who work in rural areas. The political and social environment that defines whether people can fulfill their capabilities is, as we have just heard, much more limited in rural areas in many ways than it is in urban areas. That's why young people leave rural areas. Some of them may come back later, and we need to look at ways in which rural environments can sustain young people when they want to come back to the places where they were born and grew up and for which they have love. So the work that we do, I believe, that culture is a powerful source of empowerment through co-creation and through other programs. Participation in the cultural life of the community is a human right because it helps us to protect all our rights and the capabilities to be who we choose, but also to fight and work for the environment that will enable us to do that. The image that you can see there is very important to me. It was at the end of the prison opera that I've shown you several images from. And what you're actually seeing in that photograph is the current Minister of Justice of Portugal and the former Minister of Justice embracing two current prisoners. And that bond is happening because of the co-creation work that they made in making an opera. I want to finish just by talking about that environment, that difficult world in which we live that I touched on at the beginning and that made me hesitate about wanting to speak because I wasn't sure if I could be encouraging. And I finish with these words that I hold dear from the great American novelist Ursula K. Le Guin. Towards the end of her life, she said this: "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. But then, so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begins in art." Thank you very much.
You want to sit down? Would you like to sit down? It's okay. So you can stand there by the mic. François, to be honest, when you started, I was worried that it will be like a room full of depression, but the ending is not a happy ending, but it's still like a hopeful ending. We have several questions. How many we can give depends on how long you will answer. So let's see what happens. So one of the first question is, has your understanding of success in art changed over the years?
Gosh, that's a good question. A great deal of what I think about art has changed over the years, but not the basic idea of those ideas of equality and human rights and belief in people. That has not changed. And I think I have always found success or defined success in terms of what other people feel about their work. I see success when people are proud of what they've done, when they want to share what they've done, when I see them grow and blossom and be empowered by their own changing capabilities. So in that sense, it hasn't changed, but it expresses itself in different ways because we live in a very different world than the one that I started in.
There's another question that involves change. What's the most powerful change you've seen happen when art truly connects with a community?
Oh, it's always been people changing. And not, as I said, not because of anything I have done. It's often been, it's been the most moving experiences of my life. I spent a day in the Portuguese prison talking to the young men after the opera project. And at the end of that day, a young man, he had tried to talk during the session, and he had wanted to speak in English, although most of the conversation was happening in Portuguese and it was being translated for me. But he wanted to speak in English because he wanted to speak directly to me. And he felt he had not been able to express what he wanted to say to me clearly enough in the group session. So he came to me afterwards and he said, he said, listen to me, what I understood in this experience was that I can choose. I can choose what I do. It's not only other people around me. I can choose how I live my life from now on. And those moments are always the most humbling and powerful because, again, as I say, this is a change that he was ready for and made for himself. And it was meaningful to him. It really wasn't anything that we as the artists had done.
The opposite. Well, was there a moment in your practice when you realized that art has real limits, or perhaps when those limits were precisely what made it meaningful?
I've found the last few years difficult because I have been working in this field for a long time, and I have reflected a lot on what my work may have done, may have achieved, even though I think I always had relatively realistic expectations of it. But of course, we work in a vast world with enormous forces that are much bigger than anything that we can do. So I am aware, I'm conscious that in many ways the conditions of life for working people in Europe today are worse than they were 45 years ago when I began my working life. For example, housing, health, job security, many other conditions of life are less good for ordinary working people than they were. And that is very difficult and a real limit. But it's why I talk about heroic optimism, that we are many. We are many, many people. And sometimes I think of the conditions of Europe in 1945, when many European cities were destroyed, when millions of people were displaced. And within 10, within 15, within 20 years, we had rebuilt Europe. We can do amazing things. I believe in people. If we choose, if we want to cooperate and work together, we can change the world.
I know it's time for coffee, but I really want to use the opportunity that Francois is here. So no, not yet. We have more questions, and I won't leave Francois to leave. So the question is, do you think regional contexts have, or rural contexts, have something essential to teach the wider cultural sector about sustainability or belonging?
I live in a French commune of 750 people. One of the things that is remarkable about that is how active that community is. We have at least 20 associations. We have a huge level of cultural activity in the community. One of the strengths of rural areas, I think, is if they find the courage and the optimism, they know actually that their future depends on themselves. And they are very good at organizing to make things happen in their area and to demonstrate to others the capacity. And the fact that actually the way that happens is by talking in the cafe, not or in the street, not on social media, I think is a strength of rural communities today.
There is a question that I think belongs to this one. in your work, you've often crossed boundaries between urban and rural spaces. Do you feel that this divide still matters today, artistically or socially?
The boundary between rural and other
Yes, and
spaces.
urban.
I do think it is a serious European policy problem. In France, the urban population has grown in the last 10 or 15 years. The exodus from rural areas continues. And until we find ways of revitalizing rural areas, which is a national concern, not a rural concern, it is a national concern, then we will continue to be societies that walk with a limp, if you like.
I have the last one here. It's not a question. It says, "You're amazing. Thank you." And that's true.